Now at 6:30, new data from the US Census showing St. Louis City's population continues to decline. According to that data, from 2023 to 2024, more than 3,000 people left the city of St. Louis. And it's putting St. Louis on a list that it certainly doesn't want to be on. According to the census, St. Louis lost the second most amount of people in the nation, only behind Shelby County, Tennessee, which includes Memphis. Other areas made that list include Hinds County in Mississippi, which is where Jackson is located, and New Orleans Parish County, that of course is home to New Orleans. Well, the population decline in our region could have some significant impacts on your life in several different ways. To talk more about that, I am joined by St. Louis University professor Ness Sandoval, who studies demographic trends like this. So Ness, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Let's take a zoomed out version of this first. Unfortunately, over the last several years, for a while, St. Louis has been losing population. Talk about some of the factors leading to that.
Sure. So from the 2020 census, we have a net loss of individuals, about 9,000. And it's a combination of factors. We still have domestic outmigration of residents who live in the region who are moving to Dallas, Houston, Chicago. And so we actually want more people moving in than moving out. And so that's been happening for a while. And so that's what this data showed, is that about 31,000 people have left our region from the 2020 census point. The other way to offset this is you have international migrants who come to St. Louis. And for the first time, we're seeing significant numbers come in that are able to offset that loss. But I think the challenge that the region has right now is that 100% of this loss that we've had since 2020 comes from more people dying than are born. And so this should be on the top radar item of everybody in the region. We had about in 1980, we had 215,000 children under 5. Today, that's 147,000 children. We are going to be a region that's going to have less than 100,000 children. This could happen by 2035, 2044, but we have to be prepared that we're going to be a region that's going to have fewer children. And so that's really the implication here. When we see this decline in fertility, it's going to have an impact 40, 50 years from now, because those children simply are not going to be there to join the workforce to support an economy our size, which means you have to bring more people moving into our region if we want to be a growing and thriving economic region. So that's the implication at the regional level, is that we have a serious challenge with the number of children who are here. And so we need to get younger. We're one of the oldest regions in the country, in the top 10. We need to get younger. We need more families from the South, from Texas, from Arizona, to move to our region to start their families here and to create businesses.
You mentioned some of the cities where people are moving to. One city that seems to have a growing population, or at least according to the data, is Kansas City, our partner across I-70. What is happening in Kansas City that's not happening in St. Louis?
So Kansas City has captured the imagination of young people. Unfortunately, it still has a football team, and so it's in the national news. And so young people can imagine a life in Kansas City. And so there's nothing we can do as a region. We lost our football team. And so for a lot of young people, not being a football city means you're not a major city.
Let's talk about crime, because that can get some headlines, and some people anecdotally might say, oh, well, I moved out of the city of St. Louis because of crime. When looking at the factors of population loss, how much of a factor is crime? And the data actually shows from SLMPD that crime is going down. So to change that perception, how long does that take in order to get people to have that confidence to come, back to the city of St. Louis?
Crime is coming down, but it's going to take a while. We still have too much crime for the size of the city of St. Louis, of 279,000 residents. And so we need to get our murder rates under 100. Ideally, it'd be about 60 a year, just to be comparable with some of our peer cities. If we look at larger cities like Boston, Sacramento, they have very low number of homicides. So that really, homicides drives the perception for a lot of people who don't live in the city, whether or not it's safe. And so when you have 150 homicides a year, that's a lot for a city our size. And so even though it's coming down and grade reduction and everybody should be credited, that number needs to be below 100.
And, obviously getting that number down can take some time, but even changing that perception, it's almost you have to have a number of years under 100.
Well, what's going to change the perception, and it goes to your point, people on the streets. And so part of what changes that perception is when you go to downtown or you go to St. Louis and you see people walking, and it's a lot of people. That pedestrian activity is important for people to understand that people are coming back, the city is thriving, it is growing. And so there is hope, because there are hundreds of thousands of people on the move in the United States. And they are moving to St. Louis, believe it or not. People from Houston, people from Dallas, from Philly. Our challenge as a region is that when we get 10 households come to St. Louis from Dallas, we have 15 households that move to Dallas. And so we just have a leaky bucket in terms of small numbers, but that leaky bucket, when you add up all of those drops of losses, adds up to a significant loss for the city and for St. Louis County in general.
You mentioned foreign-born individuals living in the city of St. Louis. St. Louis is actually doing very well in that category. Do you think that's sustainable from what you're seeing in the city of St. Louis in order to drive up our population?
It is sustainable in the short term. And that for the region, 100% of the growth we saw in this past year came from international migration. So if it wasn't for international migration, the region would have seen a decline from both more deaths over births and more people leaving and coming in. And so the immigrants that came really did solve this challenge. But it's short term. We cannot depend, because immigration is determined by policy. And as you can see at the national level, the policy is changing. Sure. And so we can probably bet on this for another year and a half until we get new numbers in to see what the impact will be on a region our side. I think we're a little bit fortunate because the majority of immigrants who come here tend to be US citizens. Yeah. And so we're good in that sense.
And that's really an interesting conversation. Really appreciate your time. Thank you. And more news to come.